Diane McBain was born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1941, and a self-termed tomboy growing up, so it was a bit of reverse typecasting to be frequently cast as a socialite and the other woman. Diane remarked that she expected to be the ingenue, and was surprised when she was cast as the spoiled rich girl. The family moved to Glendale, California when she was a child, close to the movie industry, so by the time she was a teen, it wasn't hard for her to get gigs for print and commercials with her fresh Sweet 16 appearance, and be seen in the industry. In fact, a Warner Brothers talent agent saw her in a neighborhood play while she was in her senior year in high school. She was signed to her first studio contract and her career took off. Still in her teens, she was now in the heady atmosphere of filmdom that she only recently dreamed of, playing opposite James Garner, Robert Stack, and Richard Burton. She admits that being a teen, and Burton an English actor at the time, she didn't know who he was. The first role she played on her newly signed contract was in With James Garner. Preparing her for her motion picture debut in Ice Palace, Warner Brothers cast her in a variety of roles to play off Maverick. She was in 77 Sunset Strip multiple times, Bourbon Street Beat, and, with Ice Palace probably in mind, she was cast in The Alaskans. Sugarfoot and The Lawman came next. Finding herself in one acting gig after another, while dating the elite of the young actors at the studio, she was caught in a whirlwind of activity. When she did have some time off, the studio filled it with photo shoots, or movie magazine layouts with the young guys under contract. Ice Palace was not only Diane's motion picture debut, but it was also George Takei's, as Wong. He, of course, is known for the Star Trek franchise, as Sulu. Filming started in August of 1959. Set in Alaska after World War I. It follows two Alaska settlers, Zeb Kennedy, Richard Burton, and Thor Storm, Robert Ryan, who were on either side of Alaska's statehood. Diane portrayed Zeb's granddaughter. At the end of the film, Storm speaks before Congress and is instrumental for the territory to become a state. Filmed around Alaska, there was background footage at Mendenhall Glacier. At one point, there was so little snow, they were forced to change locations. As soon as Ice Palace was completed, Warner Brothers teamed Diane with a bunch of her contemporary contract players. She and Troy were always good buddies, and Van Williams was a family man whom she respected. Lee Patterson was a Canadian actor who was around 10 years their senior. But they all got on well together. Troy played Sandy Winfield II, Van played Ken Madison, and Lee was Dave Thorne. Diane was Daphne Daffy Dutton, whose yacht was moored by the guy's houseboat. The four of them had some good times, splitting their time with the studio and their location in Miami. The other regular was Margarita Sierra, a singer in the Fontainebleau Hotel. Surfside was the telephone exchange. You are up in years if you remember that telephone numbers had a prefix with a name before the numbers. Shortly after Surfside wrapped, Margarita died in 1963. She had heart problems, and was 27. She did not survive the heart surgery to correct the issue. The famed director, Josh Logan, was interested in Parrish, and Clark Gable was rumored to be Claudette Colbert's love interest. When Delmer Daves took the reins, Anthony Perkins and Troy Donahue vied for the lead role of Parrish. Natalie Wood was under consideration for one of the young woman leads. The film was set in the tobacco fields in Connecticut. It centered around Parrish coming of age. While Colbert was hired to be a mother figure for Diane, who played a strong-willed young woman, whose father, Dean Jagger, was nonplussed to contain. It was one of the times that Connie Stevens and Diane were in a film. Usually they were competing for the same roles on the lot. The film shows the conflict between Parrish, Troy Donahue, and his stepfather, Carl Malden, who his mother, Colbert, has married to give herself and her son a stable, financial life. Max Steiner composed the film's score. Steiner believed that every major character should have their own theme. Hence Diane had her own theme as Allison. In her autobiography, Famous Enough, she said of Colbert, "She was the biggest movie star I had ever worked with. I didn't know what to expect when I came face to face with her on the first day on the set. She was outwardly nice to me and at times friendly, but not very warm." In the midst of Surfside 6, Diane was cast in the leading role of Claudelle English. Depending on whom you read at the time, she either replaced Anne Francis or Shelley Winters. Stocked with the beefcake from the studio's contract players, she worked with Chad Everett, Will Hutchins, Sugarfoot, and Robert Logan. Again she worked with Claude Akins from Ice Palace. Diane played the title role, Claudelle English, the only child of a poor sharecropper, Clyde English, Arthur Kennedy, and his wife, Jessie, Constank Ford. Shy and pretty, when she starts dating Lynn Varner, Chad Everett, during their high school days, her mother disapproves because he will be a poor sharecropper as her husband, and she fears Claudelle will have the lackluster life that she has endured. But Claudelle won't be deterred, and intends to marry him. When Lynn is drafted into the army, Claudelle fears that they will grow apart. Lynn assures her they will marry the first day he returns. They exchange letters while he's away, but inevitably that dreaded letter arrives where Lynn tells her that he's met someone new. Incensed, Claudelle decides to get even with Lynn by becoming the bad girl and entice the boys. Hence, the story of Claudelle English. After Claudelle and Surfside 6, she went into a new motion picture, Black Gold, with Phil Carey and James Best. She started to be noticed outside of the confines of the Warner studio, and producer Hall Bartlett reached out to the studio to borrow her for his new movie, The Caretakers. She was cast as Robert Stack's romantic lead. Joan Crawford had a substantial role in it, as well as a financial stake in it. In Diane's autobiography, Famous Enough, she wrote that she was jealous of her and did her best to manipulate the scenes that she was in so they could be cut. By the time she was finished, my part in the movie was nearly non-existent. But, undaunted, she went into the film version of Mary Mary, which had been a play on Broadway. She co-starred with Debbie Reynolds and Barry Nelson. At that time, Debbie had shed her teen roles, and with her own drama behind her with husband Eddie Fisher and Liz Taylor, she wanted mature roles, and she seemed to affect a snobbish accent. I mentioned that to Diane at the time, but she assured me that Debbie was a joy to work with. Since this was director Mervyn Leroy's adaptation from a Jean Kerr romantic comedy, it centered largely on Bob Kellaway's Barry Nelson, Penthouse. A review in the IMDb commented Debbie was channeling her best Bette Davis, which what I was referring to previously. Diane was fortunate to have had a number of quality directors. One of them, Raoul Walsh, directed her next venture. It was to be his last film. Diane was paired with Troy Donahue again in this, A Distant Trumpet. But the sparks didn't fly with them. Troy was smitten with Suzanne Pleshette and they got married shortly after. With only lukewarm reviews, it was 2 years before Diane landed a film role again. It was after this, that the studio put her in a small role in Sex and the Single Girl, and she rebelled. She was 22. It was more than 2 years before she got another role after leaving Warner Brothers' protective star system. But the role was a starring role with Elvis in Spinout. She played Diana St. Clair, an author who's researching her new book, The Perfect American Male, and wants to have Elvis's character, Mike McCoy, as a subject. Similar to Parrish, the male lead has to decide which of 3 women are vying for him. In this case, Elvis marries each of them, but to 3 other men. Diane, as Diana St. Clair, reveals to Elvis that he is the perfect American male for her book, and devises ways for him to marry her, something Elvis has no knowledge of, while she has already started to make wedding plans. Spinout was number 57 on the year-end list of the top-grossing films of 1966. After Spinout, she did 2 episodes of Wild, Wild West with Robert Conrad. See her autobiography for her comments on Conrad. Diane was known for her Pinky Pinkston role on Batman, but she did 2 characters. One before she did Pinky. She played Lisa, playing the conniving assistant to David Wayne's villainous Mad Hatter. David was a distinguished Broadway actor, so it was camp for him to play the Mad Hatter. Because Surfside 6 was shot in black and white, the sets didn't have to be top drawer. In fact, when she got to the Batman set, she said, in her autobiography, that she felt a rainbow exploded. If you noticed, Van Williams from Surfside 6 was on the Pinky Pinkston arc. In fact, Adam West, Batman, was under contract to Warner Brothers, and they had run into each other on the lot frequently, so they were not strangers. Here are still photos taken in the 60s and press junkets with Bob Hope and Johnny Grant. Diane married Rod Burke on February 6, 1972. Evan was born in 1973. She and Rod divorced in May 1974. To support herself and her son, she took roles to pay the bills. Among them, Thunder Alley, and I Sollied to Tahiti, with Gardner McKay and Richard Denning. Sprinkled among them were TV episodes. Among them The Man from U.N.C.L.E. with Angela Lansbury. Here are a number of photos I took when I was with Diane when she was in San Francisco, as well ones she took when she was showing me how Evan looked in the baby outfit and blanket I had crocheted for him. Here is Diane with Evan, circa 1980, maybe. Even though when she started her career, Diane admitted she had difficulty memorizing her lines, by the 80s she starred in a number of soap operas. With their fast pace, she kept up with the best of them. In fact, her email address was One Take McBain. Her first role was as Foxy Humdinger on Days, which ran for 20 episodes. It was this time in real life she was assaulted. Her Days cast rallied around her, especially Frances Reed. 4 years later, there was a writer's strike and General Hospital had to insert some new storylines post-haste. One was for Bobby, Jacqueline Zeman, who fell in love with a politician, Alan Feinstein, and Diane was cast as his wife. She did 11 episodes, but when the strike ended, so did the storyline. At one point, she was up for the role of Rose Kelly, who ran Kelly's, but that part went to Loan Bishop. In 1999, she had a minor role as a society matron on Young and Restless. And here is Diane, with her goddaughter, Mary, and son Evan. And here are a number of photos when my son stayed her in the mid-90s when he had one class to complete at UCLA. And here are photos of Diane in her later years and until just recently. Here is Diane in recent years with her co-author, Michael McCaud, and with Barbara Luna, as well as Ruta Lee.